Taylor Walker from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Shannon Hurn from the West Coast Eagles.
This is Nathan Jones from the Melbourne Football Club.
Phil Davis from the GWS Giants.
It's Brad Avery from the Port Adelaide Football Club.
And you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hello, it's MJ. Thanks for tuning in to another Coaches Panel podcast. Hope you've been enjoying all the pre-season episodes, whether it be the strategy, the structure, or the 50 most relevant. Thanks so much for being on the journey. Maybe you've been reading the articles that have been landing through coachespanel.tv. Thanks for being on the journey with us in 2019. I've got a number of the members of the panel, plenty of stuff to talk about. I got Tim. Hello, mate. How are you?
G'day. How's it going?
No, very, very good, man. And Jimmy, got you back in the studio. Nice to see you again.
Hello, MJ. Hello, boys. Hello, listeners.
And Ridley United is here. Hello, mate. How you doing?
Hey, buddy.
There's plenty of stuff I want to talk about, but really for this episode, I want to pivot away completely from salary caps. So there could still be some learnings for us, especially from a cash cow perspective. But a large portion of this podcast, I really want to focus on keeper leagues, and especially the new draftees and the new additional players that have been available to us thanks to some fancy rulings from the AFL. What I want to do predominantly in this episode, and there are some other questions, I want to get a burn man out of you a little bit later on of just generally speaking for fantasy, a surprise superstar that you might want to shout out for. But really I want to spend some time, I want to allocate you almost some virtual selections in the draft. And let's go for the first 12 picks. So to make it benefit for people tuning in, we don't know people's waiver wires and who's been thrown back into the board of a redraft of a keeper league. You would not be picking the players we're about to suggest in a brand new startup keeper league. They do not go in the first 12 selections. You're starting to look at, I don't know, someone like a Tom Mitchell maybe. Might be someone you're looking at in a selection through there. But I want to give you, you know what? I'll tell you the picks you've got just to give you like a 30 seconds head start. Jimmy, you're going to start us at pick 1. Tim, you're going to... Yeah. Pick one
put
might
some
be.
thought into that.
Yeah. Okay, use the time now, Carlton style,
Yep.
to think about your future selections and how you're going to screw up by trading one of them.
Right.
Tim, we're going to give you pick 2. Rids, we're going to give you pick 3, and then we're going to keep going through that format. So it won't be a snake draft. This is not for your specific sides. This is not anything. It's rather Jimmy with picks 1, 4, 7, and 10. Tim will give you 2, 5, 8, and 11, and Rids will give you 3, 6, 9, and 12. Using only guys that have been recently drafted to clubs that would be available in everybody's existing keeper leagues. I want to know who you're picking and why you're picking them there. Once a player's off the board, they're off the board. It's not but I ranked them at 3rd. I don't care. It's once the player's gone, they're gone. And this may help you. Maybe you've got your keeper league draft kicking off very, very soon, and maybe you get some value early on. Maybe you won't. Jimmy, we'll go straight to you. Pick 1. Who's going off the board for you?
So can I trade this pick for a future pick and
just tell me his name,
okay,
idiot.
Sam Walsh.
Yeah.
You're going, if you've got pick 1, you're picking Sam Walsh. I don't think there's any real question mark about that at this point. As Rid said in our podcast the other day, he's every chance he's going to be the best young mid drafted since Josh Kelly.
Yeah.
If you've got pick 1, you pick him. Don't muck around with it.
Yeah. All right. Was there any point where you seriously thought about having pick 1 in this virtual draft that you're like, oh, maybe I do look at some? Was there any serious consideration for any? It was just if you have one, you pick Walsh. Don't mess around.
Yeah, absolutely there is. And even if you're not a huge Walsh fan for whatever reason, maybe you hate Carlton, maybe you just don't want him. You're still picking him with pick 1 anyway because his trade value is huge.
Yeah.
And if you'd rather have any of the other kids we're about to go through in the next 11 picks, you trade Walsh and get that kid and something else back for
and
him.
A fair bit of something
comfortably.
else.
So, you take Walsh with 1. You don't muck around with it.
All right, fair enough. That moves us over to you, Tim, at pick 2. Walsh is off the board for you. But who would you be picking if you had pick 2 and Sammy Walsh was off the board?
All right, there's a couple of guys you could toss up here. It's not as clear-cut as pick 1, and I've already seen, a few different ways this can go and keep a redraft. But for me, I'd take Bailey Smith from the Bulldogs.
Okay.
He's just, the Bulldogs have already said this week he seems like a seasoned player for him. He doesn't come in and seem like a young kid. They're talking about he's just built well enough to play. And
he's a big boy.
He's the kind of guy who can rack up the stats, at least in the juniors. So
I had him at 2 as well, just quietly.
Okay, so I'm keen about that. Ridge's got selection 3, so he's obviously going to just hold quietly on at the moment because he'll have a pick in a second. But was it because you're like, I want to build a side around a really big, strong midfielder? I want to make sure I get him. I don't think I'm going to get him in the next pick. Was that kind of theory, or just after Walsh, I think Smith's the best mid, and therefore that's who I want to lock in?
From a fantasy point of view, that was basically where I went.
Okay.
He just seemed to me the second best mid pick from fantasy point of view.
All
so,
right.
yeah.
No, I think there's a really clear top bunch of couple that we're going to see some very similar names. I'm fascinated at how these are going. Not obviously pick 1. That's no surprise to me. Rids, that leaves you at pick 3. Walsh is gone. Smith is gone. Who would you be selecting next off the board with your third selection?
So if I have seen Smith go at 2 before the guy I'm going to pick, I would have weed my pants a little bit with excitement.
Okay.
I'm going Isaac Rankin.
Yes.
Who is clearly the best forward in this draft from a fantasy perspective, and who I actually think is potentially the best player in the draft with a Walsh. Like, he's the most likely to challenge Walsh out of this draft.
Yeah. What is it you like about Isaac Rankin? Because I know from a salary cap mindset, it's the thought process is, got that really high price market. So some are concerned, and we're not focusing on salary caps right now. But sometimes that logic can filter down into our minds as a keeper league coach, where we go, oh, he's just so expensive in salary caps. It's not a great side at Gold Coast. How much time does he get midfield? What is it about Rankin you like that ranks him so high for you that really it made it sound like he was your number 2 selection if you had it?
He's clearly number 2. Like, there's daylight between 1 and 2, and there's more daylight between 2 and 3.
Okay.
So I'm not trying to be harsh on the Bailey Smiths or anything.
No. It's a personal ranking.
I reckon big-bodied midfielders are a dime a dozen.
Sure.
Rightio, in every draft. And, you've seen guys like Zach Merritt go in the 20s and stuff, So, and I mean, I just think it's a lottery after the best clear mid in that draft.
Mm-hmm.
So, just with Rankin, though, I love owning guys with X factor.
Yeah.
I love watching guys. I love football, Radio, and I love watching football. And when I watch exciting players like a Rankin who can get 20 touches and kick 5 goals in a game, he's just how you doing to me.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so there you go. Rids gets to land who he has at number 2 in his personal ratings. He gets him at number 3.
And I've got a bit of time now till my next pick, so I can go change my pants.
Yep, you're right. And if you missed the past 3 minutes and have just tuned in at the podcast at this point, you need to go back for your own benefit. That brings us back to you, Jimmy, at pick 4. Walsh is gone. Smith is gone. Rankin is gone. Who goes off the board for you next in a keeper league?
Okay, I think the next one... fairly comfortably for me at this point is Connor Rose.
Oh,
Rose, however you pronounce. I'm a fan of this kid. He's just I would say I think he's got just a little bit of X factor about him. I wouldn't be too surprised if he ends up as a mid or as a forward or as a defender one day. I think he's got that ability to settle into any of those depending on where they develop him at Port. But I like the kid. And that's as much personal preference as anything.
Sure.
He would sit at number 4 for me from there. Okay,
and was that a real easy selection there? Or are you umming and ahhing, looking at 2 or 3 other names going, yeah, I like Rose, but there's 2, 3 other... Or was it, once you knew Rankin was gone, Smith was gone, and obviously Walsh, if you had pick 4 and they were off the board, you're like, yeah, here's where I'm going.
So far, the draft has gone as per my rankings sitting here, so that's made that pretty straightforward, I think, for me.
All right, there you go. Tim, you've got yourself pick 5. Again, you're not choosing for the same side. It's not like you're going to land yourself Smith and. It's rather if you've got pick 5, and this is the way the draft is playing out in a keeper league, who would you be choosing to go for at pick 5 in this keeper league redraft?
Yeah, so I'm sure everyone's got different rankings, which is part of what this is about.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point.
For me, I find it really hard to pick rankings once you get to this 5 and beyond. I'm not as confident in picking.
It's a lot of a lottery from
bit,
this point.
Or at least from my point of view, it's more of a lottery. I don't have the confidence in saying the guy who I'm picking at 5 is definitely going to be a guy who would end up as number 5, whereas the first few guys you have
the first 3 or 4 you feel really comfortable with.
Yeah,
okay.
Like there's always a cutoff at some point each year in the rookie draft. I mean, depending on personal rankings, but yeah. So there's 2 different ways you could go, and it depends if you want to go for a guy who has value early, who you can then trade, or if you're looking for a guy who's just going to be the best guy for your team. Long term.
And that depends on how many you keep. Do you have a rookie list? How much do you throw back into the pool next year? There's all those variables, sure.
Yeah, because you look at like Davies Uniacke last year.
Yeah.
Was really early pick, but his value now is much lower than
12 months ago.
A Jack Higgins or a Jaden Stevenson,
sure,
who would have been picked later in keeper redrafts, sure, but are now currently worth more.
Yeah.
And who knows where they'll all end up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyway, the guy I've gone with is Jackson Hately, the giant,
nice.
big 192, I think, centimetre midfielder, basically.
Yeah, he seems to, there's been comparisons that he plays like an Adam Tomlinson. It looks like he's playing across, one of those early spots into that midfield unit. And they just seem to love him up there. And he's similar, not in terms of a type of player, but like Rosie, who could end up defender one year, could end up forward another year, could end up midfielder another year. Hately's probably similar to that too, where he's just such a versatile utility of a footballer that I could see Leon Cameron going, stuff it, we're going to spend 6 months with you, mate. Being a strong forward option. Nah, I need a big-bodied midfielder. Nah, I need to use your class and poise on the outside. So, yeah, I don't mind that pick. So far, this is how, if this is the draft, how it played out, who you would pick at that spot. You'd pick Walsh at 1, you'd pick Smith at 2, you'd pick Rankin at 3, Rosie at 4, and Hately at 5. Again, it's not your exact draft ranking boards. It's rather, if this was how the draft was unfolding, who you would pick at that point in time in the draft. Rids, you're up at pick 6. You've changed your pants, hopefully, in this period of time. If you're at pick 6, who would you be picking at this point on?
Now, I apologise about the background noise because I've got a helper with me.
Oh, you've got your son's. You've got an assistant coach.
I've got an assistant coach. He's actually like a talent scout for me. So he's been out.
Okay.
I've actually got, me personally, would be going different type of guys here. Okay.
Sure.
So I've been looking through it, but because I'm a bit confused about the rules. Okay. So I picked the forward first. Does that mean is he the same guy as I'm picking next? So if I pick another forward,
you can pick whatever you like. Because again, this isn't saying it's for your specific side. It's if you had a first top 12 pick in a keeper redraft, and at this point on, which for you would be pick 6, who would you choose to pick? I know there's so many variables thrown in there. It's what's on your team, who's available, all that kind of stuff. It's more trying to give people an understanding of how you're kind of ranking and considering choosing players at this point on.
Okay, so he's just told me that he wants me to lock in the best defender in the draft.
Ooh.
That's what he said to me, so I'm just going to back him in here, and I'm going to put in Jordan Clark.
Okay, nice.
Now, that's not personally what I would do normally, but anyways, it's a Jordan Clark because my talent scout assures me this kid is something special.
And he's shown a fair bit, not just on the JLT match over the weekend where he filled that Zach Tui role very, very nicely, but even in his under-18 seasons and the championships, you could see this guy just uses the ball really, really well by foot, makes some really great decisions both in the air and at the ground, and geez, he's got some pace to burn too.
Yep. And what he does, okay, is he's got a bit of poise.
Yeah.
He's got a bit of time about him. He's got some... Me personally, okay, I always think to myself, what I want to do is try and get the best of the line.
Yep.
So I'd be happy with a Rankin, and I'd be happy, like at that point, and I'd be happy with a Clark at the moment. So I'm going to go a midfielder next, okay?
Well, it's not your pick, but that's good for us to know.
I'm just letting you know.
All right, there you go. Lads, quickly plummet the midfield ranks, so he's forced to go somewhere else. Okay, so therefore, halfway through this kind of very faulted logic, but interesting enough to hear your thoughts draft of a new keeper league in terms of the redrafting of which kids you go after. Walsh, Smith, Rankin, Rosie, Hately, and Clark. You've got your second last pick, Jimmy, at 7. They're off the board. Probably for someone at pick 7, it would be their first selection.
You'd think so, yep.
What would you be doing if you were looking at one of these new kids on the block?
Sure. I would... I did have a couple of names here, and as Tim said, I think at this point it's getting a little tricky to work out exactly which way you want to go, and it's a bit of a gamble, however it is. But at this point, I'm going for who I think is one of the best forwards in this draft, and that's Nick Blakey.
Ooh, nice.
He's always going to be a forward. You're never at risk of him losing that forward status and becoming a mid-only, which is sometimes a bit of a risk with your half-forward flanking types, which is nice. But just being a very tall but very agile young player, I think he's got a lot of potential about him to fill the fairly sizable shoes of Buddy up there one day, and I really like the kid.
All right, I like that pick. And again, it's the kind of guy that because he's a key position player, you've got to have even more so of a longer term view.
It is a long term view, yeah. You don't pick him expecting him to go at 80s or 70s and potentially not even 60s in his first year. You're picking him as a project player to fill that gap, and on the premise that you've got a deep enough list to be able to hold him long enough to make him worthwhile.
No, fair enough too. Oh, all right, there you go. That's who you'd be taking at pick 7. Let's go to pick 8, Tim. It's to be your second last selection for our little mock mini kind of faulted logic draft, but for the sake of somebody else. You've got pick 8. Who would you be considering to draft at this point on?
Look, a guy I just kind of like. I reckon he'll get a few different positions over his career, and that's North's guy, Taron Thomas.
Ooh, okay.
He's not necessarily a guy who's going to jump out and average huge straight away, especially at North currently. They seem to not have a huge amount of high-averaging players for fantasy, but they are a bit on the up, and they've basically said Taron Thomas has basically played midfield, but he can play a bit forward. North's spoken about they could play him forward, they could play him back. Different years, different roles, depending on what they need. And he's a big guy and just looks like one of those guys who could become anything, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, similar to pick that up, you mentioned at your last pick you were kind of umming and ahhing about a couple of selections. If you had pick 8 in a keeper league at this point on and you were picking a kid and not going off the pool, which again, the premise of this draft is not to go there, how much are you umming and ahhing about another selection here, or are you feeling like, okay, this late on in that first 10 selections, I feel confident enough that he's the right pick?
Oh, there's a few other guys I'd happily pick. He's not like the clear guy at this point.
Sure.
It's, as I said, it's all sort of washing together a little bit for me. But given who's left, he's just the guy I go.
All right, fair enough too. I don't mind that. Interestingly, I wonder if that was Rid's pick. We'll find out in a second, mate. But you've got pick 9 in this kind of keeper league virtual draft. Who would you be picking that would be left on the board at pick 9?
Okay, so just give me a sec here because we're going to have to consult the talent scout.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, he's talked me out of the mid because this guy should not be he should not be there at number 9. There's actually 2 guys that should not be there at number 9. But this guy should not be there at number 9 ever, and that's Max King.
Max King. All right. Interesting.
Wow, wait. This guy could have gone number 1 in the draft if he didn't do his knee. And he still went at number 4.
Yep.
They've likened Max King to Nick Rewalt. So if I can get someone even close to a Nick Rewalt with a pick 9, happy days.
Oh, yes.
And there is potential that he's going to be a ruck forward as well.
That's true. It's very, very true.
Yeah, so he should not be on your list at number 9.
Okay, interesting. This will be your last pick, lads, and then I'm keen to get your thoughts on what you should or shouldn't be considering on from this point on. So this is your last pick, Jimmy. For the sake of everybody still trying to play catch-up on where we are, off the board right now, Walsh, Bailey Smith, Isaac Rankin, Connor Rosie, Jackson Haitley, Jordan Clark, Nick Blakey, Taron Thomas, Max King would be the first 9 selections, hypothetically, of just choosing the new kids on the block in a keeper league draft. Again, not a brand new one, but a redraft, purely focusing on the kids. There's some questions I want to ask you all in a minute, but I want to get your last selections in. Jimmy, if you had picked 10 in a draft and these names were off the board and you're picking a kid, who would you go after?
I would bend the rules that you've given me and not pick a kid.
Sure.
It gets to this sort of point in the draft where when those clear-cut best kids are already taken off the board,
yep.
I don't like picking kids just for the sake of picking kids.
Right.
That tends to be how I approach these sort of things in the keeper league. What I'd be looking at if I had this sort of a pick is more going after the kid that from previous years that shouldn't still be on the board, but probably is somewhere. Kids like your Hunter Clark, your Davies,
Caulfield, maybe
Caulfield, yep. Jack Graham, those sort of players. Scrimshaw, Miles will be in a lot of drafts as well available. Cunningham, that sort of player is the sort of player I'd much rather take here than going for another 18-year-old fresh into the system.
But we're going to make you pick one. So what are you going to do?
All right. All right, fine. Kano, that'll do.
Huh?
Isaac Kano.
Oh.
That'll do. Yep. Him.
Quaynor it is.
Yep, that's it. He's he looks all right.
Very eloquent.
He looks fine.
Yeah, he's fine. Look, he's he does need a little bit of injury to Collingwood's 22 to get into the team, but he's got a bit of something about him. He could go okay, but if I'm given the choice of picking him or LDU or Hunter Clark, I'm picking one of those.
Yeah, you're taking the guy that I know has got that extra pre-season of development.
Exactly right. Those sort of players are the ones where people are taking them with top 10 picks in the years gone by, and then inexplicitly drop them because they've run out of patience too early.
Yes.
And if you can capitalise on that, all power to you.
Okay, interesting enough. It's good to know. You really, sold me that he's who you would really take pick 10 in a draft, but I understand what you're trying to say. And there's some questions, Mark, I want to have about it too in just a moment. Tim, pick 11 again, being forced to pick a kid in a keeper league. Who would you be looking to consider at this point on?
I'd probably just go for try and get a bit of value at this point, and it seems like Eli Smith from the Lions is most likely to get decent games and maybe decent points early on this year.
Yep.
So, see how he goes early and see if you can trade him for a bit of value partway through the season if you need, say, a better depth player or something, depending if you're in contention or going for kids.
Yeah, nice. I like that one. And again, I'm not going to ask you because you've been torn on a couple of selections the past few rounds. So Eli Smith is who you'd be taking 11. Then Rids, I guess, to wrap us up in our 12. And then I've got some questions for each of you about some strategies and structures that maybe is a little bit closer to what you would employ rather than what you're being forced to do today. Who would you be picking at 12, man? If you were picking a kid and these names were off the board, who would you be looking after?
Firstly, I can't believe that Jack's still sitting there, Radio. That's just me. But I would be going Chasey Jones.
Chase Jones. Why Chase, mate?
This kid's special. So he's quick, he's whippy, he's an accumulator of the football. He's won plenty of. He finds the ball plenty. But the thing is, he's also smart around goals. So he is likely to be a mid-forward, averaging 90 to 100 for the rest of his career, pretty much. And he will get games this year.
Yes, he will. Interesting. Okay, so there you go. There's some names I want to get your thoughts about, and then some strategies I'm keen to get as well. But for the sake of the for the illustration of the activity, it was Walsh, Smith, Rankin, Rosie, Haitley, Clark, Blakey. Then it was Thomas. It was King of the Max variety, Quaynor, Eli Smith, and Chase Jones wrapping out the top 12 of the draft. There's some kids I'm going to get some thoughts from you on in a second, but here's a question for all of you. At what point in a keeper league redraft of the opening round selection, at what point do you abandon the initial kids selection and start picking the best available? So maybe, Jimmy, you kind of hesitated a little bit and alluded to that. Where in this draft field would you be going? If you had pick 5, are you pivoting away? I know it depends on everyone's pool, is what makes it an unquantifiable variable. I get that. But for you, where's a general sense of, is it pick 5, is it 7, is it 10? Where are you starting to look at more than just the draftees? Yeah,
sure. Look, I think depth of the list is probably the biggest factor in this, in that if you're playing with lists of 40 and keepers of 35, then you're probably using all 5 of your picks on a young kid.
Yes.
If you're playing in a list of 30 and you're only keeping 15, 18, 20 of those, then I've got, as I said before, no argument with doing that in the first top 10 picks if there's someone of value who's going to be potentially as good as any of the kids you'd be picking this year. I think those first 4 and then either the King and the Blakey types are probably a pretty comfortable top 5 or 6 from where I'm sitting. And from that point onwards, I'm quite happy looking at the options around them.
All right. Are you in a similar position too, Rids, in terms of the way you'd play it? Are you thinking once you're in that latter back half of draft picks, you'd start to consider the depth that's around? Or are you always, with a top 10 pick, are you big on get the best kid available?
Oh, no. I reckon there's about 5 or 6 kids in this draft worth picking, and then the rest are just guesswork.
Yeah, right. Okay, and they're the ones that kind of went in that top 5 or 6 you've spoken about.
Again, I don't want people thinking I'm hating on kids and anything like that, because I'm not. I love the kids. I love that part of the year, but I'm looking for someone who's going to be in the top few over multiple years for their position. Rightio. I don't see that outside of Walsh in the midfield at all. There's potential, yes, but there's potential for all of those kids.
Sure.
You look at a Davis Uniacke last year. I reckon this year he's going to be the player that everyone expected last year.
Yes,
because he's had that 1 year in the system. So if he's on the board, I'm going him over Bailey Smith every day of the week.
Sure.
Okay. On top of that, I doubt there's going to be anyone stand out, like Eli Smith, the Hyphen, Jones. They're all such hit and miss type. Hately.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Caldwell's another that we didn't mention before that'll go top end for a lot of drafts too.
Who is that, sorry?
Caldwell?
Yeah, Caldwell, yeah.
Yeah, Caldwell will go. I mean, there's even guys down the list, okay, like Jack Ross for Richmond, who may very well get early games.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you just don't know anymore with these midfielders because they're a dime a dozen. Like, one of the guys, okay, last year that went very late in the draft is a Tom North, who got picked up by Fremantle, and I expect him to get games this year, and when he gets games, he's going to be like a Zach Merritt type, because he knows how to win the ball. These guys don't clock the times and the stuff of all of these, combines and everything else where they're not in that top elite status.
Yeah.
So for me, I reckon the top 5 or 6 is very, very clear. Like, guys like Walsh, Rankin, Blakey, even King, who are absolute standouts in their position. Jordan Clark potentially has that.
Yep.
And then there's just daylight to the rest of them, and it's just absolute guesswork from there on.
Yeah, well, there's some interesting guys there, Tim, that we've all kind of alluded to the fact that you are seeing go in inside that first 10 to 15 selections again. It depends on all the strategies that coaches go for, but guys like Caldwell, who we've alluded to, didn't get mentioned just in that little piece of things. Stocker is another that I've been seeing going considerably early, even a Jack Lukosius. If people are kind of drafting off what they see take place in a real AFL sense, go, I'll go and do that too. So we are seeing these names of players that are probably going to be very, very good footballers. Now, whether or not they're good fantasy players is a different conversation, but it's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's kind of after those initial kind of top handful that are really clear, you may have a different, someone you may have 2, they've got ranked at 5, someone you've got ranked at 3 has got ranked at 4. So, but that top kind of 5 is really clear, top 6 is really clear, and then after that, it's as much as about personal preference, the team you go for, and what your squad's like. You could probably even throw a Riley Collier Dawkins into the mix of that as well, of guys you know are going to be good players. It's just, is it worth using one of your first 2 picks on for them? I guess that's the case, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, I guess so. And look, as we were saying, it also depends on individuals. Some people might just really want to pick the kid who their club drafted as well.
Yeah, it's true.
Rightly or wrongly.
Yep.
And look, there's nothing so much wrong with that. There's a lot of joy to be had in owning one of your favourite young players, but which is half the point of a keeper league. But Time and time again, you're going back even over the last couple of years, we've seen coaches use a top 10 picks on drafting a Clayton Oliver or a Patrick Cripps and then drop them to the waivers mid-season.
Yeah.
Geez, you'd hate to be one of those now, wouldn't you? That's and you'll look at that, it'll happen again this year. People will draft the Bailey Smith or the Jai Caldwell types. And halfway through this year, those kids haven't got a game, or they've played 2 or 3 but averaged 40, and they'll drop them. They'll lose patience right away, and they'll be available on the waivers or available in the redraft next year. And they'll be well worth looking at in comparison to those next year's drafted kids.
So is it best to then, if you don't have this, again, general rule of thumbs are dangerous, is it best approach then, outside of a top 5 pick, get the best talent on the board and hope you can pick up a kid later on in the draft? Because people do forget. Once the opening 2 rounds go, people forget about the kids in the pool. And so maybe you could go and get yourself a Taron Thomas or a Quaynor. I know they went early enough in ours, but maybe it is the Chase Jones or the Collier Dawkins or the McHenrys or the, anyone. I'm just picking draftees names at this point on rather than anything specific.
Yep.
Is that the best approach, Jimmy, you think, if you don't have one of the clear best ones?
Yeah.
Go the talent and then maybe pick up a kid later?
Yeah, I tend to think so. Again, as a very broad and general rule,
it is.
And notwithstanding the size of your list and the depth of the draft. But if I'm sitting there with pick 7, 8, 9, 10 and Hunter Clark is there or Isaac Quaynor's there,
You're picking
I'm
Hunts.
picking Hunter Clark every day of the week. Comfortably, and so I'd really be looking at that sort of thing, because as you said, if you really want some kids, you can go and get them later. But I don't see anything wrong with filling your draft with those recycled types, trying to get some value and taking a punt that a couple of those are going to break out like the hype about them was the year or 2 earlier.
Yeah, it's fair enough too. There you go. There are just a couple of the kids that the panel would look at talking about and trading and to bring into the side, but also some of their strategies about how you look at keeper leagues. Nearly going to wrap up this podcast episode, but rather than just keep it entirely focused on keeper leagues and new keeper leagues, draftees, I want to get very quickly from you, lads. Give me a big pre-season call. I don't need much justification about it. I'm curious to get a little, but not too much. Give me a burn man, a guy that you think it could burn coaches pretty severely this year, and then who you think is going to be a surprising star. Again, not saying you're going to pick them, but you're just going, look, I think there's something here. They're going to surprise a lot of people. Tim, who's your burn man, and who is your surprising star?
Burn man is Goldie.
Oh, where are we?
You need justification, or we just leave it with that?
No, you can't just let. You got to give me something.
Oh, he said don't say much. Look, I just think he's got a few question marks. So a lot of people are going, oh, he's the alternative if you don't want to start the 2 rucks.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't play a single game with Bruce last year.
Yep.
So not having Bruce around doesn't change that.
Sure.
Which a lot of people are just automatically thinking. Secondly, he's playing with Tom Campbell in the preseason at the moment, and the coaches sort of suggested maybe we'll see if we can get them to work together.
Yep.
So obviously if that happens, you don't want him. And even if it doesn't happen round 1, will it happen later? I don't know.
Yep.
Anyway, that's just my feeling on Goldie. That's
your burn man.
My call on that.
That's fine.
And the surprising star, look, it's not so much a going to be a star of the competition or a 100 averaging guy, but just in the back line, particularly in Supercoach, I'm just going to go with Darcy Moore in that he's playing key defender now and taking most kickouts in the preseason, and Lyndon Dunn's injured. For the moment, Jeremy Howe's pretty much not had a preseason, so Darcy Moore could enter the season as almost rookie priced in Supercoach and getting, spoils, kickouts, all that sort of stuff. Because he only played 4 games last year where he didn't get injured, and in Supercoach he averaged about 70 in those, and he had an 80 and a 90 in there. So if he stays fit, I could just see him being quite a solid defender.
I like it.
Supercoach.
I like it. What about for you, Rids? Who's your burn man and who's your surprising star?
Okay, so my burn man is Cade Simpson.
Ooh. Yes. Talk me through that.
Okay, so it's a matter of time now, isn't it, with his age? So surely there's going to be a point in the season, okay, where he's going to be sore or he's going to be looked at having a rest, so they can play the kids and everything else. They've got a Newman back there now. They've got a couple of other guys, floating around. I just don't, at that age, I just worry, when there's a rebuild.
Sure.
Yeah, I had him on my list of options as well. He's watching him the other night at the ground, I didn't recognise him at first without the long sleeves on. And I don't know if that was his problem. He just wasn't accustomed to his attire for the night, but he just didn't look quite himself. And when he did take the kickouts, he didn't have that same penetration to his kicking that we've been accustomed to over the years as well. So I've got definite concerns with him this year as Carlton are trying to rebuild.
All right. Okay. Interesting enough. What about for you, Rids? Who's your surprising star then?
Oh, well, it's not really going to be a surprise. It's just that no one wants... I don't think anyone's got the kahunas to pick him except for me.
Right.
So it's Tim Taranto. I think this kid's got 105, 110 average written all over him.
Yeah.
And he's playing pure midfield.
Yep.
His shield's gone. Whitfield's pushing up to a wing. I don't know. Everything screams out that this kid... They let go of Setterfield. They let go of a Shield.
Scully.
There's a reason. You know what I mean? There's a reason for this. I just think, this guy's going to come out and absolutely smash it.
Yeah, I do not disagree. Is that across all formats or one specifically?
I don't particularly think he's going to smash it per se in Supercoach, but he could.
Yeah.
Again, Supercoach is a weird monster, okay? When I think someone's doing well, they're not. And then when I look at someone else who I thought was playing similar, they're scoring a lot better. I just don't get it. So he's a clearance beast, okay, Taranto. He's good around goals. He knows how to rack them up. This kid, and he's a tackling machine. Oh, wow. And his third year. Ooh, wowee.
All the signs are you might need to change your pants again. But no, all the signs are that he's going to be heading for a good year. To wrap up our podcast episode, Jimmy, who's your burn man and who's your surprising star?
Okay. My burn man is someone I was pretty hot on early in the preseason. I've gone cooler and cooler the more I've looked at him.
Tom Lynch?
Zach Merritt.
Oh.
Don't be silly.
Talk me through Lynch. Zach Merritt.
Look, I know he's underdone and he didn't look right the other night.
Sure.
And there is still a few weeks for him to get that sorted. But I'm not convinced that he's going to have that same ceiling that he used to going back a couple of years.
Interestingly, I think in Dream Team, and that's where certainly he's relevant in all formats, but that's where I think last year he only had 5 or 6 games over 120 anyway.
Yeah, so I'm not sold, and I think he is value potentially at that price point, but there's other options that I like more. So he'll be the one I nominate there, along with the guy that we spoke about in some depth just recently in Rory Laird. I think...
You're going the double burn.
I'm going to go the double burn.
Good man.
I think he will probably still be a premium defender, but I think there's question marks on him, and I'm not comfortable paying the price that he'll start at for the average I expect him to deliver.
Oh, okay, so still very much like we spoke about in a previous podcast episode, you think he's in the top few, but you could probably get him cheaper.
That's it. There's a good 3, 4, 5 or 6 defenders I'd rather have than him at that top level.
All right, there's a couple of double burns on the way out from Jimmy. Who's your surprising star man to wrap us up?
Okay, well, I've not spoken enough about my Tigers tonight yet.
Here we go.
But I want to talk just briefly about Jack Higgins. I think
you can't help yourself, can you?
Look, he's.
Do you want to talk about Camden McIntosh?
No, not really. If there was a barn door to be hit, Camden's not the first guy I'd be calling. But Jack Higgins is he's fairly reasonably priced at about 60 odd, and I expect he'll be playing a lot more midfield this year than he has before. But he's listed as a forward, so just quietly, I think he could be a nice little bump in his average coming this way.
I'm going to have to start
both
putting
formats.
I think I'm going to have to start putting some kind of sound effect, like just anytime you start talking about a tiger, just, I don't know, I've got to do something there. But, we'll work on that for a future podcast. Hey, man, appreciate your work today as we've talked through not just some keeper league options, but some burn men and surprising stars for salary cap coaches.
No worries at all. Pleasure as always.
Tim, as always, to you, mate. Some very fine work and some nice drafting earlier on.
Yep, cheers.
And Rids, how many changes of pants has it been for this podcast?
Just 2, mate, just 2.
Just 2, okay. So it's a normal podcast. That's a good sign. Hey, mate, appreciate everything you've done this time around.
Just one quick one.
Yeah.
Surprises. Caniglio and Brayshaw. There you go. Bye-bye.
Boom. Nice little. That's it. Rids out. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. If you are loving the podcast and you haven't given it a 5-star rating or review yet, you can certainly do that via Spotify and also iTunes, and plenty of articles for you to check out over at coachespanel.tv.